So I got asked to show some of my processes using an agent to help write code, and so I'm going to do that today. There's a gem that I created to make this easier called agent context, and what this gem does is it provides a bake task which allows you to pull in context from other dependencies. So not all the dependencies have context, but a couple that do. The sus gem for testing, the decode gem for documentation, the two that we're going to look at today. So once you've added the gem, and just pull it in, I think I already have it installed, we're going to go ahead and pull in the context from the other gems. And so we're going to run this command called bake, which stands for better rake, which stands for Ruby make. It's just a command execution tool, and it's really easy to use, and you can pull commands in from any installed gem. And we're going to run agent context install, which is going to install the context from several other gems, as we mentioned. So once you've done that, you're going to get this .context directory, and also this agent.md. Now this agent.md, you can modify it, and you can add your own stuff to it. And it follows, there's actually a spec called agent.md, and this I'm trying to follow some spec because there's a whole bunch of different ones, like Claude has their own, GitHub has their own, every other editor that does agent-based programming has their own kind of like bespoke standard for how you're supposed to do this. And I like the fact that agent.md is trying to standardize this, so I've settled on using this. What you'll notice is there's like a lot of stuff in this file to start with, and it's all under this context heading. So everything in this section is automatically generated. So if I add some more content, like if I was to explain like some personal programming practices that I prefer, but if I delete all of that, then if I run this command again, then everything inside this section is just recreated from the gems and the content that you have from the context that's installed, but the rest of the file is left alone. So this blends together sort of an automated mechanism for building an index of documentation or context that the agent can rely on. So in this section, what you'll notice is there's some instructions here for the agent to follow, before performing any code documentation or analysis tasks. Read and apply the relevant documentation referenced in the following sections. And so what you'll see is there's a bunch of things here. Each section is actually one of the gems that has context, and then each one of these is a very brief synopsis of a particular file that provides context to the agent. So if we go and look at one of the ones that we're going to use briefly, this decode provides a coverage tool for documentation, and this is the document that explains how to use the coverage tool, how to write documentation, that kind of stuff. It's not a fully scoped, it doesn't include everything. The important part of these context files is they have really high signal to noise ratio, so that the agent can load a particular file and isn't going to use up a lot of its context unnecessarily. So there's a second file here called Ruby documentation, which explains how I like my documentation written, and using the standards and formatting and all that kind of stuff that I prefer. And so all this is in here, and then there's an index file in here as well, which I'm not really sure if that's particularly useful. It's automatically generated from the gem. It provides the agent a bit more detail. If there's metadata in the gem spec, it puts it out here, and so I guess the agent can go and look for those extra documentation or whatever. But that is an index of the documentation for that specific gem, and then agent.md is an index for all of the different bits of documentation you've pulled in. And so what I want to do, this gem, Async Ollama, is a gem for talking to the Ollama LLM hosting system. Ollama lets you run LLM models locally, which I really like. I'm a big fan of, I suppose, having control over your tech stack for a lot of reasons, like just the fact that you have control and privacy and other elements of that. And so I like Ollama for that reason. I've chosen to use it in places where I guess alternatively you could use GPT or Claude or some other like SaaS agent technology. But yeah, I really like Ollama. And so I've got this gem which lets you access Ollama really easily. So I'll give you an example of that real quick. I've been working on these tests today. It's really hard to make deterministic tests for non-deterministic behavior, but I did finally settle on using temperature 0 for all the interactions, and with that I found that it's running pretty reliably. So here's like a synthetic conversation. This just represents a conversation. Hello, I have a coffee. The user says again, I have a donut, and then the user says I have a sandwich. I have them in their order, coffee, donut, sandwich. So this context is all provided, this chat history is all provided into the conversation object. And then this particular test is checking the summarization feature. So all of this information is going to get summarized by the agent and then deleted from the conversation history. And then we ask the agent to use the summary that it created. What do I have in the order that I mentioned them? And the idea is that the assistant will reply with something to do with coffees, donuts, and sandwiches, like in that order. And so if you run this, like in principle, like that works. Okay, you have a donut followed by a sandwich and then coffee. That's an interesting combination. So as you can see, like temperature 0 doesn't always work. You have a donut, sandwich, and finally a coffee. Well, that's pretty funny. It's not working at all now. I thought it was working. So as you can see, like these tests that try and be deterministic, they're quite tricky, and that's one of the challenges of dealing with AI. And I'm thinking a lot about how we can expose context and make that context useful. But one of the things that concerns me is that we don't there's no process for evaluating the quality of that context given a particular task. So we've written all this context documentation that you've seen here. Like here's how to do test coverage or something. Documentation coverage. But there's no actual evaluation. Like the only evaluation that was done was me when I wrote it, and I tried it out and said, oh, this seems to be good, like ship it. And that's problematic because if someone came in here and deleted this, there's nothing to indicate that it no longer works. Or someone has modified this documentation and made a mistake, there's no validation of that process. And so I started thinking we should try and close the loop on agent context. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to actually write tests against this documentation. So I wanted to say, given this context and this problem, can you generate something that I would consider a reasonable solution to that problem? And then run that as part of CI, so that if people submit changes or improvements to the documentation, that we can validate that. And I think that even goes further than just agent context. Even documentation intended for humans. So that the documentation intended for agents should be really high signal to noise. So what that means is you don't repeat yourself, you don't provide scaffolding that regular humans might need. With humans, you've got a wide variety of skill levels, and you want to try and support all of them. When they come to a documentation on how to do something, there's going to be people who have like no idea what they're saying for the first time. And there's going to be some users who are just like, right, I know exactly what I want to do and how to do it. I just need to see like an example so I can see the API interface or something. And so documentation for human has to support and provide scaffolding for all those different kinds of users, but documentation for agents isn't the same thing. But it still seems relevant to me that even with the documentation for humans, I don't think I have much in here for this gem. Oh no, I do have a little bit. So this is over here, this is like more documentation for humans. And it just explains like how to install a gem, explains like some of the core concepts, gives a couple of examples, but it's not particularly deep. And probably that's realistically, the documentation for humans should probably be a bit more comprehensive, but I don't have that much time to write documentation, unfortunately. But my point is, the signal-to-noise ratio of human documentation can be a lot lower for the purpose of making it easier for humans, but the signal-to-noise ratio for agent context should be a lot higher. But coming back to my point, there's no reason why you shouldn't say, given this human documentation and this problem that the human is trying to solve, like, I want to install this and do the thing. Is the documentation sufficient to support a user in that journey? And I think like the same mentality, like we write documentation and we evaluate it at the time it's written, but it's not something we test. We don't have, at least I haven't seen people like writing tests against documentation saying, hey, does this documentation actually still work? I like the idea that sometimes in documentation you have examples. So if we go back to the getting started guide, like there are examples, like in principle, like you should be able to run these. And I suppose like if you have the right tools installed, you could. Or you could extract code blocks out of Markdown and then try and run them and report back, oh, the example in this piece of documentation to work. And I know there's tools that do that, which are great, but I still think like there's the actual crux of the issue is whether the documentation facilitates users to solve a particular problem. And I don't think that part's tested. Like if someone came in here and just put a whole bunch of random examples, all the examples worked, but it didn't actually explain anything, you'd be no better off. So that's the space I'm kind of thinking about right now. And so I want to go ahead and show like quickly how to use agent.md. So I've given a lot of background. I've been thinking about this a lot. And so I'm just going to ask, I'm using GPT 4.1 because I ran out of like premium tokens or whatever. And honestly, like Claude is amazing compared to GPT. So like if we get half of, like if it even works half as well as Claude, then that will be amazing. But so let's go ahead and say, can you please consult the documentation coverage context and tell me the current for this library. Let's see if I can figure anything out. I've deliberately pointed at agent.md just for the sake of making it easier, but in principle, it would be nice if agent.md, as I said before, if it was a standard and that just all editors would respect that. So I found GPT is less likely to do the thing, which is pretty funny. Okay, can you please review the coverage MD and run the relevant commands? Let's see if that's enough to... Okay, there we go. The documentation coverage for your library is currently 12 out of 54 public definitions, which is approximately 22%. Seems about right. The coverage check also lists all missing documentation for public classes, methods, contexts with error due to insufficient documentation as enforced by the decode gems coverage task. Okay, thank you. Thanks. Can you please consult the Ruby documentation guidelines and add missing documentation? So now it's going to go ahead and read the guidelines and figure out what needs to be done and hopefully write decent like, you know, a lot of documentation is mechanical and it's just a lot of busy work. Sometimes I go through things and incorrect or add extended information, but honestly, most of it's just mechanical. Like, hey, I've found that AI is surprisingly good at figuring out like type signatures in untyped languages, like Ruby, which is quite. I'm not sort of if I should be surprised by that or not. I'm not really sure. This is kind of. I guess the first time I did it and it wrote good documentation, and actually I've mostly used Claude for this. I haven't done this process with GPT that much, so I don't know what GPT is going to come up with, but I guess we'll find out. Kind of looks like it's just stuck reading files. I guess it's going to try and read everything into context, which seems like a bad idea. It's probably just do like one file at a time or one symbol at a time. There was a way to see context usage. Maybe it's only in cursor. Let's keep on going. Okay, you're ready to proceed. Let's go. Yeah, I've noticed this, like, sometimes it hesitates a bit, and GPT, like, we can set its run out of context basically because the type signatures aren't really right. So we're just I'm gonna go ahead and interrupt it and say, so consider the Ruby documentation guidelines, the type signatures for union types should use not comma, and parametric types should use not triangle brackets. So what's interesting is, like, this is actually outlined, and so I've noticed that GPT is worse at this, and I don't really know if it's only a context problem, but over here inside this Ruby, so I did read this file, and it is explained in here, like, for parametric types. Let me just find one. So here's like an example of a parametric type. I don't know if there's enough. Maybe there's not enough. Then it shows up 3 times parametric types. Yeah, here we go. Composite types. So it does show, like, the preferred style, and yet it didn't really get it correct the first time around. Now it's correct, so that's okay. Good. Okay, let's see. Now the other thing that it missed is I prefer to use the guidelines also use returns rather than return. And so I guess we're kind of just correcting the agent so that hopefully this now becomes top of mind for the agent when it's going to go through and do the rest of the documentation. But in principle, well, I've experienced this issue more with GPT than I have with Claude. Let's put it that way. And so I suppose it's probably either a context or a training issue. Okay. Can you run the documentation tool again and confirm that your changes have improved coverage? So yes, please continue other files. So let's have a quick look and see if it actually made sense. So there's another thing which is done here that I don't, hold on, I'm okay with this style. When the method is just an accessor, I just tend to prefer this one line, like at returns. I don't bother like having a full-on description because it's kind of pointless to say that this returns the thing and then have a structured type signature with it returns the thing. I'm going to go ahead and just tell it so this is also included in this Ruby documentation guideline. It explains it somewhere in here. I can't remember where, but it does. And so this may be another limitation of GPT, but let's just say, hey, so we'll keep that. Let's keep that one too, but let's go back here and say, so for methods that are primarily an accessor, please just use returns. You don't need to include repeat. So for methods that are primarily an accessor, please just use @returns. You don't need to repeat the preceding comment with the same information. So yes, please. So this chat represents a response from Ollama, and it has the message, if it was correct, or the error if it failed for some reason, and if the agent requested to do some kind of execution, like run this script or do this integrate with this MCP or whatever, it returns this list of tool calls. Obviously, there's a model and a bunch of like metadata, total duration, load duration, context usage for the prompt, context usage for the response, timing and stuff. And so this is just it's just a plain old data representation basically. So that looks much better. So that looks good. Yes. Please apply similar changes to the rest of the project. Please use the documentation coverage to track your progress. Now what's interesting is like this is kind of explained already. It provides the tools. Here's how you run them. Here's how you understand the output. What counts as documented. And here's the process for achieving 100% coverage. Document all public APIs, common issues. That's total hallucination. I guess, actually, no, it's not a hallucination, but there's no point using rake to run bake. That's my opinion. Anyway. So maybe what I need to include in this guide is just a really basic set of like, here's how you do the thing for the user. And it also might make sense to have common misunderstandings for the agent. At least we've seen like a bunch of things that I had to correct, and I've found Claude, as I've said, like a lot more reliable in this regard. It seems to weight the context more heavily. Okay, continue, yes please. Perfect, let's go. Let's have a look at what else it's done. So it's done that, generates a response from your prompt using Ollama. Okay, so it's made like another mistake, which again, like over here in Ruby documentation, we're using like at parameter, and it's used at param, which is not the syntax that my documentation tool prefers. So it should be the usage of at param is incorrect as per the Ruby documentation context. Please use parameter. So let's see if that's enough to get it to go and fix those issues. I like how it's just, oh yeah, it's all been fixed, and then you're like, well, actually, no, it hasn't been. How about this file? Why don't you grab the entire project? Check. You know, the thing I've noticed about Claude versus GPT is Claude just seems much more proactive, but sometimes Claude will go off on a tangent and just do stuff that you don't want, and that's problematic too. So I've seen Claude just go around in circles for hours, like not hours, but until it has 25, there's 25 tool invocation limit, and then it's like, do you want to keep on going? And you're like, I think like we need to go back and figure out what we're actually trying to do. Okay, the rest of the project will be checked up. Okay, great. Okay, please keep on going. This feels very, well, if it was Claude would just go through the whole thing and it'll be done. So I feel like GPT is in this instance, isn't doing as well. And why? Okay, so it's decided to move. It's decided to move that up there. I don't know why. Maybe it's like for all the things that it picked out of this documentation, it looks like it's actually like picked up that. And in fact, that's not really my preferred style anyway. I really prefer the initialize method to be at the very top anyway, and then actions to. So it's my fault for running this this way, but for all the things it picked out, it picked that one and decided to move the attribute. Oh my goodness. Oh well, never mind. Okay, documentation, yeah, it's 39. Okay, keep on going. You can do it. It needs a bit of encouragement. I'm just gonna, I guess, I'm a big fan of documentation and type signatures. They shouldn't be code. You shouldn't mix code changes. If we want to move stuff around, I guess. Although I'm not that great at it, sometimes I'm just like, oh, I'm going to fix all these things at once. But yeah, it's not a great idea. And why has it decided to do that? I don't like that syntax either. Okay, it's looking better. It made a lot of stylistic changes. Okay, documentation coverage is 100%. Is it really? Oh yeah, good, excellent. Let's read through it and see if it'll. First, let's see if it needs any more. Okay, it's good. Let's have a quick check. So, keep. Okay, so it's added a bunch of white space that it shouldn't have. It's added those, but actually they should. It didn't really know to fix it this way. So that namespace is like a pseudo. It says this is a namespace that exists, but it's not something which should be documented as part of this project. So async Ollama is a module that sits in. I guess we could document Ollama as a module, but what would you really say? It's just the project description or something. So what this does is it says these two modules, well, they are documented, but the documentation is just saying, hey, this is a namespace that exists for the sake of the gems implementation, and this module actually comes from the async gem basically, or it's irrelevant to the project itself. So, but that should still be good. Okay, so let's go through some of these. So that looks good. They look all good to me. Oh, but I noticed something here. It's actually regressed on this because for some reason it's decided to remove the documentation, and I have no idea why it decided to do that. So I'm going to go back and I'm just going to go roll all those changes back. That was pretty funny. So that's okay, but like from there on out, that one, and that one, the rest are okay. So I don't know why I did that. Maybe it was just trying to cause chaos. One of the features I like is if I do this once, it's going to just simply tab complete it everywhere. That looks good. Actually, that's not no, it's always going to return something. Cool. Okay, so that mostly looks good to me. Default endpoint to connect to, generate returns. Yeah, that's okay, that's okay, that's okay, that's... These ones should be... So this is also inside the Ruby documentation context, and GPT has just not picked up on it. And I've used Claude and it does, so again, another difference. These and other attributes statements should be using the attribute tag, but you've used returns. So I'm just going to take, can you grep the project and fix these? And the reason is, like previously when I said, can you fix these, I just looked in the one file, didn't actually go look at the whole project. It seemed to lose a sense of I have modified all the files in the project incorrectly and I need to go and fix them. Instead it was just like, yeah, I'm looking at this one file, I'm going to go and fix those ones. Again, Claude seems to be much more aware of the project. I'm not sure if that's because Claude is indexing the project or some other mechanism. So we'll let it do that. Chat. Has it made other changes? That looks okay. Conversation. See, now it's got super confused. Like size is actually a method and returns something. We could call it an attribute, but technically it's a method, so we should use returns. But that looks all okay. That looks... didn't we? No, we didn't. Generate. Roll that back. Roll that back. That's good. That's good. That's good. That's good. Roll that back. We don't want that one. Okay. Okay. So once you've got documentation in a project, bundle exec back utopia project serve. We can do this, and then we can open that. I don't know what that's doing the thing. And then over here in the source code index, now everything is documented. And if we go and look at, say, client, then we have all of that stuff sitting there. And so all the documentation is pulled out. The type signatures all kind of make sense. If you click on that, it goes there. So it's all like linked together and all that good stuff. So that is the value of using the context. And to be honest, I'm a little disappointed that GPT required quite a bit of hand-holding to get that right. My experience, as I have said multiple times with Claude, is that it's significantly better, but it's still extremely useful. Probably what I could have done is just say, hey, please go and reread the Ruby documentation guidelines and make sure you're following them exactly. I could have been a bit stronger and seen if it would just pick it up, but the goal is to, I guess, capture the processes. So another example of this is writing tests. Over here we've got guidelines on how to write tests. It explains how to do stuff, and the goal is you can point the agent at this set of guidelines and context and then go, please ask it to go and write tests, and then it will follow those guidelines. Now this is not necessarily specific to my projects either. Anyone can add. If we go and look at, if we go here into the sus gem, the only thing that really matters is that it's a gem that has a context folder. And so any gem that is released with a context folder will get it installed with the agent context install command. So if you have a gem and you want to add context and use it with an agent, feel free to just follow this. There's actually documentation and guidelines that is included as agent context. So if you add the agent context gem and then install the context, then you can ask the agent to write agent context for you using this context as a guide. So this agent context explains all the details of how to write context and how to make good context, I guess. Well, not all the details, but enough of the details that you should have to get something working. So yeah, probably going to leave it there. But if you have any questions around this stuff, it's a really fascinating area. And I feel like there's a lot of stuff that we don't know as engineers at the moment, or we're facing down a path that has a lot of uncertainty. And I personally find that really exciting because I'm able to leverage tooling like this to make myself more efficient, more consistent, and build things in ways that I, even like 2 years ago, if you said, would you be writing code like this? I wouldn't have known what to say. Like, I wouldn't have had an answer. And even just within like the last year, things have changed so much. And so I suppose the goal of some of this tooling is not necessarily to set something in stone, say, hey, this is the right way to solve this problem. It's more like, this is, let's try this and see if it works and if it's useful. And I feel like even with GPT, we saw that it wasn't as good. Probably what I should do is make another stream for another jam using the same process but running it with Claude. As I said, I ran out of like tokens, and then I think we'd see like quite a different experience. I think GPT is good for like just general stuff, but I don't know if it's that great for writing code. So very exciting area, and I look forward to seeing people maybe try and adopt agent context, and I look forward to people exploring how they can use context, automated context, to make their work better. Cheers, see you next time.